Hi, this is Little Dwarf, and I'll still be rambling incoherently into a microphone, but today instead of playing a game, I will be talking about one. Specifically, I will be talking about how it felt to play Fallout 1 for the first time in 2021. I was only 3 years old when the first Fallout came out, so I naturally kind of overlooked it. Even though I was always a big fan of CRPGs and narrative-driven games, and did not have any problems reading copious amount of texts in-game, I was kinda wary of those older isometric RPGs, being a little put off after trying and not really liking Baldur's Gate 1. My first Fallout game was Fallout 3, which I thought was okay-ish, kinda bland and rather forgettable. Then there was New Vegas. That one I remember quite vividly and still love, and I considered it always to be pretty great. And then there was Fallout 4, which is an abomination unto the Lord, and the less said about that glorified shooter the better, probably. But recently, having grown a little older with a broader perspective and more patience, I decided to finally rectify that mistake of never playing Fallout 1. This is a summary of my thoughts and feelings. Please remember that I was a really small child in the 90s, and my first encounter with the Fallout universe was Fallout 3, so I have a more modern perspective, I guess. And, I have a feeling I'm going to get kind of eviscerated by you, the viewers. But it seems to me that if you disregard all of the context, especially Fallout 1's release date and the fact that it was the first Fallout, and just treat it as another game, playing it in 2021, it really wasn't that mind-blowing or memorable. Now, that's not to say it was bad, it wasn't by any stretch. In fact, it's still pretty good and perfectly enjoyable, but it does not stand out to me as a masterpiece of any kind to last through the ages, save perhaps for the honor of introducing the setting as a whole, to be expanded later. Now, please bear with me and lower your torches and pitchforks for a while I explain my position. It seems to me that it might be impossible to properly evaluate Fallout 1 when playing it today for the first time, especially if one is younger and never experienced any of those 90s games when they first came out. Because here's the thing, it is impossible for me to be genuinely surprised or impressed or bewildered or anything else by most of the setting's elements introduced in Fallout 1, because to me they are, functionally speaking, a retread. I knew of the vaults of the Vault-Tec experiments of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Deathclaws, and about most of the things, already from Fallout 3 and New Vegas. Fallout 1 at most provided some context, for the beginnings of the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel, for example, but it wasn't really surprising or all that new to me. And I'm sure it was in 1997. I'm sure that people were intrigued or fell in love with many of the designs, for the classic power armor, for example, or for the Deathclaws, or for the super mutants. I'm sure it was all pretty exciting back in the day, but today, for me, it couldn't be. Not to the same degree, anyway. Because here's the thing, from my perspective, unironically, Fallout New Vegas seems to be a better Fallout than Fallout 1. It does more interesting things with its base concepts. You want political discussion? The NCR versus Legion versus Mr. House conflict asks interesting questions that are nowhere to be seen in Fallout 1. And while the Legion can be flushed down the toilet of history, and I think everyone agrees, NCR and Mr. House both have their distinct and believable flaws and merits, and I can entertain both points of discussion between those. You want horror? Well, the Legion's existence and practices are horrifying enough to me on their own, but on a more personal level, there are things like the Bitter Springs Massacre and Boone's Personal Quest, for example. You want laughs? Well, the Old World Blues DLC has you covered. Meanwhile, in Fallout 1, there were only two things that elicited some kind of a stronger emotional reaction from me. The first one was, funnily enough, in the intro. It was the world-building implications of the fact that the pre-war United States military not only executed people in the streets and laughed about it out loud, but they had no objections whatsoever to broadcast it publicly with a caption, "Our boys keeping the peace." It really tells you a lot about what kind of society it was, and what it held as appropriate. To me, it was kinda chilling. The second thing was the origins of the Brotherhood of Steel, the description of the events that led them to declaring secession from the United States government, and especially the description of their commander's thoughts. He was in such a deep denial of his own government's experiments and started killing the scientists even though they professed they were only following orders, and then after executing them all, he kinda admits to himself that he did it out of powerless anger because deep down he thought they might have been telling the truth about the just following orders bit. Besides that, I would say Fallout 1's story is competent enough, but really nothing breathtaking. In fact, I found the resolution of the antagonist's story to be a little bit silly. The flaw in his so-called master plan was just so glaringly obvious that it stretches my suspension of disbelief that he himself never considered it, especially what with his grand ambitions for the future of mankind and his supposedly vast intellect. The answer to that question which you provide to him at the end seems kinda crucial in fulfilling that plan, and it's not even as if the knowledge of that answer was particularly well hidden. The AI in the glow could have told him, as would any actual experiments done with his children, which again, if I was planning what he was planning, I would probably do that to make sure my plan would work. Otherwise, I might end up looking kinda silly, and look silly he did for me in the end. Now, I would like to deflect a potential criticism that might come up. You might think that I'm judging Fallout 1 by modern standards, or that I didn't like it much because I was bothered by poor graphics or lack of quality of life things, more common in modern games. The answer is not really, no. Because, again, here's the thing. Disregarding all of the technical details, I think Fallout 1 is not a particularly breathtaking game even compared to other 90s isometric RPGs. Planescape Torment is what, 2 years younger? And I think it's not even a contest when comparing the storytelling in those two games. The question of what can change the nature of a man and the implications of it still ring in my mind years later. Some quotes from Planescape I still remember by heart. Now, you may say that Planescape Torment, by the virtue of its subject matter, had a lot more possibility for deep questions and storylines, and that Fallout never aspired to those. You might be right, but it does not change the fact that I personally found Planescape to be infinitely more memorable, emotional, and narratively engaging than I did Fallout 1. There are many moments that I still remember, years later, and Planescape just offers... There are many moments that I still remember, years later, and Planescape offers just so much food for thought, whereas Fallout 1 does not really seem to do that. It was fun, sure, but it didn't feel like a masterpiece. There were also some irritating tidbits about Fallout 1 that lessened my enjoyment of the game, or the fact that while the first part of the game gave you a very clear time limit, the latter part was a bit unclear in that regard. I assumed I had unlimited time to stop the bad guys, and wandered around the map a lot trying to uncover all of the secrets, but in the end I think it led to some unfortunate consequences, such as a couple of towns like the Hub and the Necropolis, and the followers of the Apocalypse getting wiped out. It was also a bit baffling to me that despite the rich dialogue options, the game had a couple of narrative blind spots where it didn't really take into account rather significant actions of the player. People in Junktown, for example, were still living in fear of Gizmo months after he died. I was holding the water chip in my hands, all the while the protagonist only had the option to say he's looking for it and so on. Also, on a bit of a side note, I can't know that for sure because I only played once, but it seemed to me that Fallout 1 didn't really use skill checks in dialogue that much. While I found their implementation in New Vegas to be a little questionable, since you always knew how much you needed and whether you're going to succeed, the general idea itself was kinda brilliant to let the player manifest his character's knowledge in dialogue if he chose the right skills for the job. Overall, I did enjoy Fallout 1 well enough, I guess, but I can't say I've fallen in love with it, which I guess opens up a big question. Should Fallout 1 get retroactive kudos for being the first one, even if I think New Vegas is ultimately kinda better? I think it should. After all, building a good foundation for a later expansion is still an accomplishment, and there wouldn't be any New Vegas without Fallout 1. So, thank you, Fallout 1. I didn't love you, but I do thank you, Fallout 1. I didn't love you, but I do respect you a lot. What do you think about my opinion? What were your thoughts on Fallout 1? Did you play it at release or later? Please tell me about your experiences and how does the game compare to other titles in the series. If you wish to see how a newcomer handles Fallout 1, I made a blind playthrough on my channel, and there's a link in the description. Other than that, I also made a couple of other video essay type videos where I discuss elements of games that intrigued me. There's a link for that in the description as well. That's all for this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!